Good morning, everybody. It's Frank and Stan's chat, number 12. Good morning, Stan.
Good morning.
Your glass is steaming up already.
Yeah.
I can't get used to this. It is remarkable, isn't it, that people can wear these things for such a long period of time, and actually it sort of makes you realise all that PPE and in that hot weather that we had, where we were sort of in the garden and people were actually saving lives, up to the just horrific, deep respect. Anyway, I'm going to take this down now because and take it off and wash it. This is something my wife keeps saying, people touching their masks, and then not covering their face and all this sort of stuff. But anyway, so this is Frank and Stan chat number 12. It's actually, for some schools, their last Friday of the academic year, the last day of their academic year. Not for all, but for some. And what a year it's been. You often, this word unprecedented, but it's not happening.
It's a drinking game.
Yeah. So last week's video looks like a rip-roaring success because it appears to have been our most viewed video. And I want to thank Mike Paddingbowl for a really fascinating discussion. And as part of that, we ventured into Ofsted territory. I think it was fair last week. We were all thinking back about the experiences we'd had as inspectors and the colleagues we'd met in Ofsted. This week, we agreed, because it's just Stan and me, that we would talk about Ofsted and where we think it's at, and how things have changed, and some of it for good and some of it not so good. So that's the topic we're going to cover this week. We're going to do it in such a way that we're not going to slag off any individual or whatever. As I say, we've got deep respect for people who are managing all of this. We offer our view in the hope that one or two people might be listening and might reflect on things. But anyway, so Stan, have you had any thoughts at all this week that you want to bring into this video?
No, the only thing that's caught me, I keep spotting things that change, not just necessarily as a result of COVID, but is accelerated by that. And today is this morning, delivery times. I got an email this morning that said your delivery will come between 9:04 and 10:04.
Wow.
And I thought, very precise time. 10 not do. But then I thought, there's so many things when you buy online that I've started now saying, well, if they can't deliver it by tomorrow, I'm not going to buy it.
Right. Oh, gosh.
Remember, things used to say, please allow 10 days for delivery. No, if it's not 24 hours, I really don't.
Well, I was watching Newsnight last night, and my wife and I have been talking about how the online shopping's affecting things and how people working from home, that was the main point of it. A lot of people are very productive at home, and have enjoyed not having to commute every day and getting perhaps 2 hours back in their lives and having a little bit more flexibility in their working day. And how this is actually radically changing the way that we view our city centres. And I know that there was Sir Patrick Vallance was saying that he's very concerned about everybody going back to work. And of course, the Prime Minister, economically wanting everybody to go back to work, because obviously there are large and small businesses in our city centres that require that footfall. But I think that our family have got used to shopping locally, and there is a different style of shopping as well that comes where people actually do know you and they say hello and they want to deliver to your house.
Yeah.
There's a brewery in Bollington. I get a Bollington brewery, and that's about 12, 14 miles away from us, but they will still deliver, to the front door. And again, we'll be there at 3:00, and you know what? They're there at 3:00, and it's just a very personal So yeah, that's what's caught my eye this week, is how shopping.
Yeah, it's interesting that sudden, and I think it's going to be announced today, is it? A sudden push to get people back into offices, and you just think, well, there can't yet be any evidence as to whether you're more productive or not in offices.
No.
So it must be about spending money in the city centres, and I understand they're also going to push back onto public transport. So what's going to be different tomorrow than yesterday?
Well, was it the White House said yesterday, didn't they, that regardless of what the science says, schools are going back in September?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was from
Science shouldn't block the way forward. Yeah.
Okay. Well, just as a bit of background, Stan and I first met. Well, do you want to explain how we first met, Stan?
Yeah. 95, we were both primary heads. We both applied for the additional inspector programme. I don't know what reason Frank applied. I applied because it was either that or make somebody redundant, because the money didn't have much money. There wasn't much money in the school's budget to keep the full staff on. But then we had a period of, was it 3 days in York?
Mm.
It was very, very intense.
Yeah.
Very intense training stroke evaluation session.
Was that the one where if you didn't complete the training, then actually, you didn't get up to the mark, then you were out?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you did, yeah, and you found out you were out by them putting an envelope under your room door in the early hours. So when you woke up in the morning, there was an envelope there. You had to go home. But then we had a year of, and goodness knows how many inspections we did in that year, under the mentorship of Miriam Rosen, which was.
What do you think? What do you think of that mentoring approach?
I thought it was the best CPD I've ever had, and probably will ever have.
Yeah.
Because we learned so much so quickly, and the best part about it was reinforced because we were there for the full year. It wasn't, I suppose, a training session on one inspection, then off you go on your own. We were monitored right the way through, right till the very last one.
It was interesting. Yeah. I never saw, because Miriam became chief inspector, and I never saw her. I never ever got a sense that she was that ambitious. I don't know. She was just. I always felt she was just very, very good at her job, and taught us to be really rigorous in ensuring that we had sufficient evidence. I think that was the important thing. I know that there were times when we had very little evidence, and the framework was forcing you to make a judgment on the important areas. Towards the end of that training, she was really insistent that we had sufficient, strong evidence, and there was that sort of corporate view of where that school was.
Yeah, and the other thing that's I learned from that process, which wasn't probably the best way it was done, but editing your work and losing paragraphs and things like that, you suddenly, over that time period, you lost all kind of concern about somebody putting a pencil line through half a day's work.
Yeah. Well, I think it was.
What are you trying to say? I'm trying to say they're not doing enough English. Well, right, they're not doing enough English.
I know.
Page about it.
I think I remember. I think I used the word the children start at a cracking pace, and she loved that. But actually, I think that there was a sense of everybody in that group of colleagues and Miriam wanting to help each other to achieve the highest standard we all could, which in effect made it very like being an HMI, where when I joined HMI, it felt a similar sort of feel that actually you were just part of a group, and the group itself was the important element here, and actually everybody would do what they could to enable you to be part of that group. When you got further up in the food chain at Ofsted, it was a bit toxic. Probably, I'm not saying people were bad or anything like that. It wasn't conducive to bring the best out of me. That I'm absolutely clear about that now. Having seen it in other organisations, you can see then because the first very, very, very senior post I got was in Ofsted. I've had very senior posts elsewhere now, and you think, oh, hang on a minute, I could see this in a completely different way, you know. But I think that there was that collegiality to it, which was I found. And actually, let's face it, Stan, our friendship has, you know, gone back to the mid-90s.
Yeah, it's a long time.
I know.
Kept alive by a couple of pints every so often.
In those pints, during those sessions, we have spoken a lot about Ofsted, haven't we? I mean, I think
where it is now compared to where it was, and in my view, where it needs to go next. And you know, if you want, I'll suggest what I think it should do next, and I think it should go full circle now back to HMI as a HMI, not as Ofsted, as HMI, coming into schools on a regular basis, 1 day visit, conversation, letter to say this is what I've noticed, this is what needs. With you know, a catch-all that if you go in and you think, whoa, then there's some inspection process that you could bring in, but not inspection like it is now for every school, which feels like, you know, we need to stamp on schools and keep them in the places.
I think though, I agree fully with you. I think that in effect, going back to the 1880s or whatever, you know, whatever it was, you know, when the first school I inspected was Great Salkeld in the Lake District, or the Peak. It's some valley next to the Peak District, to the Lake District, and the head teacher, when I arrived, brought out the logbook, and there was an entry from, I don't know, 1902. And she wanted me to sign it because that was the last time that the school had a visit from an HMI. So the school is now closed. Actually, I drove past it a year or two back. It's very sad to see. It's a small village school with 2 classes. But actually, there was in the logbook contained, you know, what that inspector saw, not judged against a national, but judged against, it was his deep experience of primary schools, you know. So in a way, I think you're right. I do think you're right to go back to that sort of experienced, knowledgeable, trusted.
Yeah. But for me, checking, the judgment should be, is the school doing the right things to continue its narrative of improvement? So let's look at how the school evaluates itself. Let's look at what processes they're doing through their development plan, and are those reasonable? Are they the right things? And are they making a difference? And I know you sort of wrote some of the frameworks, but I've never quite got my head around why we have to have one framework that covers different aspects. I don't understand. If I was a greengrocer buying a banana or an apple, I wouldn't be judging the same criteria.
Yeah, actually, I don't know that all started to come in towards the end of my time. But it was interesting. The 2005 framework, the David Hinchliffe led framework, was the place where I was given some freedom to develop a self-evaluation as part of that. And I think what went wrong there, though, Stan, is that I think that's the right place. But actually, we then became inspectors of the self-evaluation form.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Instead of it being a snappy, like I don't mean on the back of a piece of paper or sort of a notebook or something, but actually just saying, well, look, folks, these are the 5 issues that I'm really struggling with. We should have done better in these exams last year. Got a problem at middle leadership, whatever it is. And the inspection comes with that, knowing that when they see that, they're not blind to it. You may have a discussion about whether they're pushing hard enough, but actually that gives you confidence then, doesn't it? Actually, they know, so many of the schools we were visiting, they didn't know what was wrong with them.
So, or they did, and were certain to hide it. My favourite one was a school inspector where the head, in a very canny way, said, I've written down what I think the key issues are in an envelope. and I'll share those with you when you finished inspecting. See if you can get it right.
But in effect, what happened was a market grew up, possibly from inspectors themselves and from ex-HMI, in terms of how to make your self-evaluation look more robust.
Yeah.
And actually, the issue we were talking about before, about the way that Miriam taught us how to write, and in effect in an Ofsted style, that was then driven into self-evaluation forms, because then it became a valid bit of currency for inspectors, where they were sort of reassured that it was written in a particular way, so it gave a sort of emphasised a sort of confidence and sureness about what was going on, as opposed to it being just
the issue. I mean, it got to a ridiculous state where a lot of the self-evaluation forms just reproduced all the data that was in every other document that you could get about the school. So it wasn't telling you any story about the school. And the very first ones, you'll remember, Frank, all started with, when I came here, the school was a real... and I've managed to turn it round.
I suppose the issue is, though, Stan, that gradually, I mean, when I left Ofsted in 2012, August 2012, the framework that I'd led through in January 2012, there were as many schools in special measures at the end of March as there were the entire year before. So that was a real significant raising of the bar. So at that stage there was about 70% of schools were good or better. Now we're in, I think, low 90s, aren't we? So actually the issue here is that, is it worthwhile spending all that money on a system where the vast majority of schools are good? Is that, and that for me is the crux of it. And all that stress and strain and pressure, how heavy do you need that accelerator pedal in order to keep everyone, okay, well, it might happen, I don't know. But this thing about head teachers do my head in when they start talking about, we've got to, and you still, I mean, I saw a tweet last week where somebody said, well, the head teachers told us that our Moxted, or whatever it's called, is going to be in mid-November.
Yeah.
What? That really is a warped system we've got now, where it's I don't know whether it is encouraging school improvement in the way that it did when we joined.
I genuinely don't think it. For reasonably good schools, let's use the phrase that's not. I don't think if schools are on the right journey. What I found when I was an advisor was schools were putting off innovation until after the next Ofsted. And it was almost, well, Ofsted then gives us after Ofsted, we've got 4 years to do what we think we need to do without being criticised. Whereas if we start to change the curriculum now, just before Ofsted come, we'll be torn apart.
Yeah.
And it was really sad to hear people saying, really good head teachers saying, well, we'll keep that on hold until after our next Ofsted. When's your next Ofsted? Probably in 2 years from now.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I know.
So what about the children now?
I think, though, that when we were inspecting it, I mean, we did see some very, very dodgy practice, didn't we? And actually, I think that's the thing that's doing it for me, is that it's as if in some respects there's a lack of trust about quality. But actually, Ofsted's got this narrative whereby, and I think the DfE, stoke it, that if you don't keep on the Ofsteds, then actually they're all lefties. So they're all, you never know what's going to happen here. We'll be back to where we were in the early 90s. I think it's really, really quite worrying, because where does this stop? And I think COVID has highlighted what is wrong with the framework. What is wrong with inspection? As far as I can see, some of the schools that are not good have stepped up far more than those that Ofsted have judged as good. Actually, at the end of the day, these schools serve their community and the children and families in them. And that, for me, the safety of those children is paramount. And okay, they've got to we want the results, but hang on a minute. Priority number one you've got schools out there that have not stepped up. You said are outstanding and good, and they're not. Because your framework enables them to do that.
Yeah, well, it's the hierarchy, isn't it, that I used to really bang on about. Because they always used to, it always used to be the thing that we do Ofsted for parents, so parents can have a judgment in school. And I used to say, well, what do parents want most in the school?
Yeah.
And they want their children to be happy. Every survey says that's what I want. I want my child to be happy in school. So where's that on Ofsted's list of criteria?
Yeah.
Well, the most important thing to parents isn't on it. And then, as I was saying last week, I think leadership became an industry for Ofsted, because in those first frameworks, it wasn't even mentioned.
No.
Management and administration of the school. So, and then leadership became, I still think this was some brilliant flawed thinking, that leadership was a judgment based on how successful the school was. So what they said was, if everything in the school's good, virtually, leadership's good.
Yes.
And then somebody said, what we've noticed is leadership's good in all these schools, and where schools are failing, leadership's not so good. So leadership must be the answer.
Yeah.
I go, well, just go back a few steps, have a re-look at it, because they've I don't know, they've not got right what schools should be about. Whether it's because they can't actually measure that and therefore can't judge it, but we can measure results of tests. We can do that. And the inspection just wasn't broad enough either. I mean, you think those first inspections, every aspect had to have at least a paragraph. I think 56 pages was.
I mean, I think I've got it here, Stan, believe it or not, if I can dig it out. I think I've got the framework for 2003. And what's really fascinating is when you look at that framework, the areas that are within the framework that are not in the framework now. It's a real, because we were in the Every Child Matters, it was the Department for Children and Families. There was a sense of, well, the school is a component of its community. What we've now got is the school is the only thing that we can actually push down on to blame for all of the things that are going on around it. We don't inspect the other things that are going on around it. Specifically to that school, they do send inspections, do social, they still do the child protection inspections.
But they're not linked, are they?
There's no linking.
No. So you don't get, if you happen to live in X, most schools are good or outstanding, social services care is rated as this is and that's how our area assessment.
Yeah.
And you could put that on, I don't know, council, we could use council, what do they call them? Boundaries, or, small units, big enough to cover, say, 2 or 3 high schools and the feeder schools. Look at social care in the same way. Look at childcare, preschool, post-16, and come together with a judgment on this is what it's like to live in this area.
Yeah, it's interesting. We were talking before, because what we've been talking about is harking back to self-evaluation and what have you. But this is actually going back to a different type of inspection framework.
Yeah. But if every part of the organisation was self-evaluating and that was the thing that was monitored, then you would have that, and it would actually be easier to inspect.
Yeah.
So your inspection would be, dare I say it, a celebration of what's going on in that locality.
It's interesting because that requires a full area assessment. Whereas I remember when I was leading joint area reviews, those local authority inspections, they were about children's services. Actually, one of the big issues for children is the housing. We never had any idea what housing was like. We had no idea really what the job market was like. We had no idea about adult services at all. And actually, I think that's the bit that I think that we should perhaps focus in on, where we've got perhaps opportunity areas. Like, for example, I'm doing some work in Blackpool. It's not the whole of Blackpool. The opportunity area is Blackpool because it's into its local authority. But actually, if you think about it, the real areas of Blackpool are quite specific areas. There's much smaller communities. There's an interesting project going on, I think called the Claremont Project, where they're trying to do that. They're trying to, to get a sense of what's it like to live in Claremont, and to actually bring those services, anybody that has any contact, to bring those together, and to try and and so that would be a way in which you could inspect that. It would become less about a particular institution, more about this is what it's like, and perhaps that's the point where you throw more resources at it as opposed
to... Yeah, I was going to say the other thing that disappeared from days gone by was the post-inspection grants. Yes. So you had your inspection and you got some money.
We spoke before and said, is there a system whereby you do your inspection, it's a pre-inspection, and you say, it's an unannounced pre-inspection, you say, look, as it stands, I think there are some real issues here. We're going to give resources to support you, and in 18 months' time, we're back.
Yeah.
You have no excuse now. You've got 18 months, you've had all this resource, all this support. Now, if you can't do it now, actually that feels to me a much fairer way of rather than giving the grant.
As long as you accept that if you are a school in a particular context, that no amount of bashing the school is going to make the difference if you only judge schools by outcomes and you compare all schools alike. I used to say when I was the head, there was a judgment on the environment, the sort of playground areas. And I used to say when I was in an inner city, not having a burnt out car or needles on the playground.
Or having all the travel of horses on the field when I arrived in school in the morning.
Yeah, but when I was in a more middle class area, it was are the daffodils straight, in the garden, and yet those two places were judged on exactly the same framework and exactly the same, and it's just not fair.
Well, I know we said we only make these 20 minutes, so I think we're on to 30, but actually the one thing I would say is that the thing that continues to do my head in with Ofsted is some of the schools that I used to be responsible for. Everybody says that this is the most challenging. Well, I know from the Sutton Trust report that we had as a Martin Academy Trust the highest proportion of free school meals and the lowest attainment on entry into our secondary schools nationally. So I mean, you can argue in any other way. So I know these are challenging communities. But the inspectors turn up, and I think you've never taught in a school like this. Actually, schools, the head teachers and senior leaders can only be inspectors if they're in good schools. Well, the vast majority of those are in particular parts of the country, parts of the local authority. They're not coming here because actually, if you're a head teacher in one of these areas, swanning off to do 16 or 20 days inspection, you haven't got time for that.
No.
So the credibility goes at that point. For me, I think when I look at inspectors, I think, could you do a better job? And I remember Miriam telling us this. Think back, would you have done a better job than the head teacher? And we rate you. And often I would say, no, I think he's done, or she's done a fantastic job. Well, bear that in mind when you make your evaluation. There's enough of that. Not enough. There's too much arrogance around my liking. And inspectors saying, well, I know I've worked in these. No, you haven't. You have not worked in these areas before. We know that. So don't try and trick us that because you don't. And as soon as they start giving feedback, you can see straight through it. Mm. So that's my rant over Ofsted finish.
I'm sure it's not over. It's just delayed.
It won't be the last, but it's done. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that we could do any better personally. I'm not saying that.
I think what I'd like to say is the introduction of inspections in the way it was done did make a difference and did make schools improve. Yeah. But we got to a point now where schools know, most school leaders know exactly what they need to do to move the school on And instead of Ofsted being a force for good in that case, it's actually suppressing, I think, development. And it needs to take a step back to where it used to be, to support self-evaluation and support schools developing, not punish them for not doing it the way that they want it done. And we've not even talked about preferred practice.
Well, should we get on to that next week? Well, next week, Stan, we have Jennifer Webb, who runs with the Twitter name of Funky Pedagogy. And Jenny is an author and a highly regarded provider of CPD. She works at Academy Leeds, and her family have go back a long way in that particular community. So she's actually been brought up in the community that she's teaching in the city Leeds. And I have a deep respect for her and lots of other colleagues at that academy who I really don't feel have had a fair crack at it, particularly with Ofsted. But anyway, I think you'll be, she has a tremendous following on Twitter. So I hope that will draw people into that. But also, I'd like her to talk about, what's it been like and what she offers on her CPD program. So I'm really looking forward to it. She's a dynamic woman, and it'd be interesting to hear her views.
Yeah.
And that's going to be number 13. I hope it's anyway.
Friday, number 13 on a Friday. Yeah.
So next week, we're recording, Stan, on Thursday, not the Friday.
Oh, right.
But it'll be posted on the Friday. Anyway, so thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. And it's goodbye from Stan and goodbye from Frank.
Right.